Breaking the Cycle 2 Critical Thinking Flaws in the MMTLP Community. Hello, everyone. This presentation is Breaking the Cycle 2, where we dive deeper into the critical thinking flaws that's holding back the MMTLP community. I'm Allan S. Billehus. I have a master's and education specialist degree, CRC LPC. I'm a vocational rehabilitation counselor. I'm also a vocational expert. I'm also a MMTLP, MMAT, and original TRCH shareholder. This presentation is produced by the Boke Rocker. We fought hard against the SEC, FINRA, and Congress, but we've suffered through congressional inaction for over 1,000 days. But it's our own mindsets that are now the biggest barrier to our success. Today, we'll explore how egos, individualism, fatalism, and learned helplessness keeps us repeating failed efforts and tactics. We're expecting the system to magically fix itself, magically stand up and just fix it. This isn't criticism. This is a wake-up call to regroup, drop the poor me story, choose leverage for settlement. Let's break this cycle together. Critical thinking epidemic. Our community is having a major problem with this. Currently, our community has 3 fatal flaws, making critical thinking an epidemic that's holding us back. First, we've become our own number one enemy in achieving MMTLP settlement by clinging to the old ways, the old guard, sticking with the tried true tactics that haven't worked for us. And we know this is true because we've had 2 years of dead silence. We know this is true because for 1,000 days, we are further away from settlement than we ever were. Second, egos and individualism prioritize personal vindication over a collective win. This is supposed to be a community that's fighting for one issue, one focus, MMTLP settlement. But somewhere along the way, we now are focused on just collecting evidence. Our underlying belief is we want to be vindicated, even if that means there's no settlement money. Third, fatalistic and defeatist beliefs that trap us into a failure story that we cling to like a desperate child to a teddy bear. This leads to learned helplessness. It's an ingrained epidemic where we feel powerless after repeated setbacks and repeated setbacks. Even when new tactics could work, it's our learned helplessness that is forcing us to fail. Because unconsciously, if you're focused on negative issues, attitudes, and beliefs, unconsciously, yourself will not allow you to be a liar, and you will purposely sabotage yourself, whether it be conscious or unconscious. What is poor critical thinking? Poor critical thinking means failing to connect facts logically, question assumptions, or adapt to new strategies. It starts with a confirmation bias, where we seek information proving we're right, like ignoring evidence that complaints aren't working, and sunk cost fallacy, keeping us investing in failed tactics after 3 years because we can't start over. These tie into our critical thinking epidemic. Learned helplessness makes us stick to what's familiar, even if it's losing, even if it's tormenting us emotionally. It does nothing but fuel defeatism. What is poor critical thinking skills? This slide highlights a common trap where we end up deferring to certain voices in the MMTLP group simply because they've built a following or positioned themselves as experts, even if their approaches aren't yielding results and haven't yielded results for a year and a half to 2 years. It points to a situation where innovative suggestions get dismissed outright, with the emphasis on sticking to the solo efforts or trusting the same unreliable institutions and tactics time after time after time after time again, despite clear patterns of deception, roadblocks, gaslighting. The implications here is that this dynamic creates a cycle of frustration where fresh perspectives are sidelined in favor of what's familiar or controlled by the few, ultimately keeping the whole effort from evolving. It's like chasing the same dead ends, hoping for a breakthrough that never comes, which only deepens the sense of being stuck. What is poor critical thinking skills? Let's take a look at optimism and anchoring. Optimum bias has us expecting government to do the right thing someday, despite everything they've done to bury MMTLP evidence, information, and obscurity from the stock market. Anchoring bias clings to initial ideas like FOIAs, making complaints, writing the OIG, writing letters to the president, writing letters to Congress and senators. Doing meetings in private is the only way. Anything you do in private with a senator and a congressperson, they can deny what was said, what was done. If you haven't learned by now, you've got to do stuff in public now. There is no way to trust them. Have you ever wondered why Trump forces Democrats to talk to him on live TV? That's the only way he can control the communication. That's the only way he can control the battlefield. Otherwise, they'll just lie and say whatever and get away with it. You've got to do things in public. If you do stuff in private, there's no real record. Government's job is to protect. That's one of our biases. And we don't realize that that's not true. We keep trusting into the system. SEC and FINRA is to enforce laws and regulations. But evidence shows none of this is true. AMC, GME, Finger, GTII. Many of you may not realize that FINRA actually gave GTII direct evidence. It's in one of the records. But for at least 2 years now, FINRA can't get rid of Alpine. And for 2 years, we've been thinking, is it a failure of FINRA to get rid of Alpine, or is that part of the game to keep the king going? And it looks like they're doing something, but they're really not. Because after all, FINRA accidentally gave GTI direct evidence. So what's going on with this? But in your heart of hearts, you've anchored on government is to protect us. And this is why you still believe in the system. No matter how much they've kicked you to the curb and treated you like crap, you cling to this hope that government is there to protect us, in spite of every ounce of information and data point and fact you've seen for 3 years in MMTLP alone. And yet, you still believe in the system. If you ever watched The Big Short, there's a big moment in the movie where this revelation is, why aren't they doing anything? And it comes down to the person says, that's because you still believe in the system. This anchor is in fatalism. Repeated tactics that feed our defeat story. Instead of building leverage in new ways with new ideas, we want to cling to the old. We want to cling to hope. We want to cling to simplicity. But the world is a lie that's been pulled over your eyes. Another example, veterans vow DC returns despite gatekeeping, calling out reps like Ralph Norman, Pete Sessions, Ann Wagner for lying, Carpo, going to criminals for help, or accusing FINRA of ignoring data, hoping exposure forces change after 19 failed lawsuits. 19 failed lawsuits. And why did they fail? FINRA walks in. They hand them their immunity card. We all know the story. But do we? Because you're not learning from the story. Why are you not learning from the story? And that's the question you need to ask from yourself. Why are you not looking at all these failed tactics and waking up and go, hey, maybe as a community we need to adapt. Maybe we need to overcome. Maybe we need to improvise. For some reason, you want to believe in Congress, the Senate, FINRA, and the SEC in spite of everything they've done to us because you grew up thinking that they were there to protect you and to do the right thing. Yet over the last 25 years, you know all the crimes that all these individuals have been doing, but you still want to trust the system. Why? Why are you doing such a thing? It is these critical thinking errors that reflect our flaws. They're fatal flaws. And if we don't wake up and correct these flaws and allow our egos to blind us from not finding new leverage, new strategies, new tactics, we will fail of our own accord. We can't blame the Congress, the Senator, FINRA, the SEC if we fail our own due diligence on our own critical thinking skills. As a community, we're better than this. Do you not realize what we've all achieved when we had one focus and one goal? And somewhere along the way, now we have egos wanting to prounce around as to, oh, I'm so smart and I'm better and then my idea is this. And, you know, what are you thinking? Honestly, what are you really thinking? Anchoring on government doing the right thing, this post appeals to Congress's duty for justice, despite years of ignored evidence. 3 years they have ignored our evidence. Yes, I know about the letters, but outside of that, they've ignored it. We've anchored on their core role to protect when they're not doing it, leading to repeated appeals without adaptation. We're stalling our own progress. We're ignoring their complicity in this whole situation. And therefore, we're preventing leverage like escalations. Are you here for the government to one day say, you're right, but it's too late now? There's nothing really to settle. Do you want to win? Or are you here just to be vindicated? Or, like many people are, they just want to be here to bolster their poor me story. Anchoring on government doing the right thing. This post directly appeals to Congress, emphasizing their responsibility and duty to advocate for constituents and ensure regulators like SEC, FINRA, and the DTC act honorably, calling the MMTLP situation criminal and demanding justice for retail investors. Despite years of ignored letters, complaints, and evidence of evasion, like over 70 members informed of the lies, but no pushback. The community remains anchored on the initial belief that government officials will uphold the laws if pressured enough. But they're not doing the right pressure tactics. Calling, letters, private meetings, that does nothing. The community is not adjusting to the reality of the systemic refusal. This bias stalls progress by ignoring congressional complicity, expecting this time they'll act, and prevents shifting to leverage building strategies. Anchoring bias. Government will do the right thing. This time for sure. Moving to anchoring bias in action. Here, the community persists in believing Congress and government will enforce their duties despite repeated inaction and blocking and evasion. This posts an example of one of those callouts. This anchors us on the idea that government's role is protection, leading to the endless appeals without new tactics, ignoring years of evasion, stalling. Let's shift to something real. Let's take the fight to them for a change. Let us make the demands directly. We've seen examples. Now it's time to recognize that our critical thinking errors and cognitive biases means that MMTLP must begin anew, shifting from expected protection to facing actual fraud from all angles. Look at this tactics breakdown table. First, repeated tagging in congressional letters fail because there's no enforcement after 1,000 days, driven by sunk cost fallacy. Second, believing in eventual help ignores evasion and lies tied to the authority and optimism bias. Third, more evidence dumps and FOIAs are warehoused by the system, exemplifying confirmation bias. These keep us stuck. Let's break free, afresh, new strategies, new tactics, new leverage. You cannot win a battle on the enemy's battlefield. You cannot win a battle with only enemy approved tactics. Breaking the cycle, critical thinking skills, key takeaways. To break the cycle of MMTLP communities' critical thinking flaws, we need to regroup and forge a new way forward, stopping the ego needs that divide us. Adapt, improvise, and overcome, or we will stagnate and you will get to keep your dignity and ego intact because you don't have to do a constitutional sit in. But if that costs you $50 million, is your dignity and ego more important than $50 million at this point? You need to choose the right leverage tools to win. Reflect on this. Will you choose that your dignity and ego is more important than MMTLP settlement money? Will you choose that the story of defeat and 3 years of prolonged fighting the government is bad, is more important than winning and getting MMTLP settlement money? Do you want to be right and vindicated, but then told, we're so sorry this happened to you, but there's no way to settle it now. NextBridge is gone. MAT is gone. There's no money. But you have an awesome poor me story, don't you? Stop the insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And if you review everything we've done, at least in the last year and a half, you will see we do it over and over and over. We've already done over 200,000. Do you think the magic number is 350,000? 480,000? Can you not see the writing on the wall? Let's choose action over stagnation. Thank you for your time. I'm open to questions on how we can implement new changes to adapt, improvise, and overcome. And of course, you already know my opinion. With an 80% chance of all constitutional sit ins having a win, I believe the time is now. All we need is within us now.